All right. Hey guys, can you hear me? Mic check 1, 2, 3. Making sure you guys can hear me properly. Let me know if you can or cannot. Yeah, super excited to have today's session. Let me know when you guys can hear me and we'll get right on with it. And I hope everyone's having a wonderful, wonderful Friday evening. For myself, it's Saturday morning here in Singapore, but I hope you guys are having a wonderful, wonderful day so far. And yeah, awesome. Looks like mic check is all good. So glad to have you guys on board. Today we're going to be talking about something really interesting, in my opinion at least, right? You know, we all have essentially what I call cognitive biases, right? And it comes from the results of, you know, something called mental heuristics, which I want to go into detail a lot more into this call. But essentially, the idea of today's database or today's build is like, how can we build a framework that helps us ask better questions, not only about ourselves, but about the people around us, so that we can actually understand what we're trying to get to the bottom of. Like, what are the fundamentals of us? What are the mindsets that we subscribe to? What are the mindsets that people around us subscribe to? And how does that fit into, what we believe in and how we interact with the world? And why this is important is because I think as people, like, we use a lot of mental shortcuts, to evaluate if people are good for us or not, and even for ourselves, what we say and what we do ends up being very different from time to time. So the real intention here, what I want to pass on to all of you guys is, just my way of being able to remind myself of the right questions to ask, when I'm trying to critically think about, what are the fundamentals behind what I do? Why is it sometimes what I say and what I do are different? And why is it sometimes that when people say they are, going to behave a certain way and they actually act totally different, how come that happens? And how can we ask the right questions beforehand before we sink so much time, commitment, and energy into these kind of relationships? How can we essentially find that out beforehand and also ensure that we aren't, diving too deep into interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships too quickly before we truly know the behind the scenes, I guess, of the inner workings of their head. And it'll make a lot more sense when I start showing my screen. I know this is probably pretty much a big topic. I don't expect us to completely, understand all of this and get through all of this in one session. I kind of see today's session as our starting point, just to get you guys into the idea of what I'm thinking of right now, like why I think we suck at analyzing who people really are, including us, right? And how we can rely less on visual cues to determine what people's values are and actually, get to the real fundamentals quicker in by asking good questions. And because this is a very collaborative session, I'd love everyone to speak up. When you guys think that there's something I'm doing that doesn't really make sense, ask questions, right? And then if there's some additional value add you'd add on top of what I'm currently talking about, then please, by all means, I'll be pausing from here to there to ask you guys to chime in. So hesitate. Without further ado, let's go and get into it. And I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when y'all see my screen properly, and we'll get right to it. Oh, Nadine can't hear anything. Double checking. Can you guys hear me? Double checking. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. It looks like most people can hear. Maybe, Nadine, you might want to just refresh your screen. Or refresh the stream, but anyway. All right, so we're going to talk about this framework. So do you need this, right? Who do I think needs this kind of framework? If you find yourself being inauthentic and don't know why, If you realize what you say and what you do are very different, and if you don't want to spend gross amounts of time committing to friendships and relationships before realizing that they're not the right people to be around, if you are looking to build meaningful friendships based on shared mindsets and not shared interests, which can change, and you often can't think of better things to say in a conversation than "How was your day?" or you walk away from conversations feeling like you haven't learned anything new about who you're talking to, this framework is for you. And so, as usual, when we go into building a system, we talk about the why and the what. We want to understand, why are we building this system? Why are we building this framework? And then what is this framework all about? What tools are we going to use to build this framework? And as I mentioned in the description of this video, as well as in the message that I sent out preparing for this meeting, essentially, we're going to be combining Notion and a tool called Whimsical, which I'll show quickly on my screen. Whimsical is just a kind of a flowchart, wireframe, sticky note, mind map kind of software. It's completely free, but essentially it can integrate well with Notion so that you can easily build out complex flowcharts. Where Notion, you can't really do flowcharts. It's just text, kind of like a journal entry almost, right? But with a lot more interesting formulas, I'd say, that we've obviously at the Quix3 community been taking advantage of. But how can we embed an interesting flowchart? Like, for example, I have a flowchart that actually handles all my email automation flows, and you'll see that this is actually super complex. Like, this is a lot of stuff. Like, I'm not going to zoom in because it's kind of boring, and the one we're going to be able to do is not as boring, but essentially it gets really cool where you can just embed this into your Notion page and then use it to remind you of the different things that we're going to talk about today, which is going to help you get through the framework. So let's talk about why. Okay, the big why, and I mentioned this already, is that we suck at analyzing who people really are, us included, right? We try to use visual cues. We call them mental heuristics, right? Heuristics to determine what people values are, and I call these values actually the fundamentals, and this will get very important really soon. And then the last thing is that everybody lies, and it may not be malicious, not always malicious, but we just tend to lie to ourselves, we lie to each other. So my thought process is, how can we always find truth, right? How can we ask the right questions to get to the truth behind, the inner workings, right? The inner workings of our minds. And again, this is gonna be, depending on who you are, you might have different priorities when it comes to, building up good relationships, again, whether it be friendships or romantic wise, even trying to understand yourself. Sometimes there's tough questions that you don't want to ask yet and you're not ready to ask, and there's also sometimes there's just tough questions that other people don't want to ask yet and you might never get the answer even if you have the right question to ask, and that's fine, right? And it depends on what your approach is for relationships. Do you want to be around people that can critically self-analyze, that are interested in finding out more about their authentic self? Or are you around people that want to be inauthentic, right? Yourself included. So this is more like my way of determining all these things, navigating the chaos of these kind of intrapersonal relationships. But of course, it is up to you on terms of how you want to apply it to your life. My way is just a way. I want to make sure that's coming across. And awesome. So let's talk about what. What are we doing today? Why are we all here today on a 9 p.m. on a lovely Friday night in Eastern time zone? Well, I want to build a framework, or we can call it a system, right? That will not only help me ask the good questions that will get me closer to understanding, who someone is, and I want to be able to gauge if their answer is a lie, whether because of convenience or malicious. And kind of sum it up in one sentence, like, it's not that I want you guys to have scripted conversations. Don't get me wrong, not scripted conversations, but I want to train myself to ask better questions than how are you, with myself, my friends, potential partners, family, etc. And this gets important because the interesting thing here is that this applies for not just obviously understanding people on a personal level. Like where I got this idea from was I read this book called The Mom Test. It's by Rob Fitzpatrick, and it's a wonderful book. If you've ever wanted to build your own business, if you ever wanted to, if you ever had a really cool idea that you wanted to kind of see if it was going to have legs to walk on as a business, essentially this book teaches you how to ask the right questions to people around you to validate if your product idea is good or not, right? And especially talking to customers also, and understanding when they're lying to you, again, not maliciously, but just people want to please, right? People want to essentially feel good about themselves, and what makes them feel good about themselves generally is not pissing the other person off when you're talking to each other. So most people, if you come up to them and you say, hey, I have this really cool business idea, I quit my job for this, I spent 40 hours thinking about this just the last few days, what do you think? They're obviously going to say, oh, it's a pretty cool idea, right? But with no real commitment behind that statement, with no real understanding of what your product is. Don't care. I mean, you didn't really give them a reason to care. You've just been talking about your idea the whole time. Why should they care, right? They're just like, oh yeah, it's pretty cool, and that's the end of it. They can walk away feeling like they didn't offend you. You walk away feeling like you have a great business product. You spend a year into development, and then you realize nobody really wants it because you asked the wrong questions starting out. That's kind of how I feel about a lot of our relationships, right? We go out and we try to make friends, and we try to find the people that are our tribe. We try to find the people that are fitting of the kind of people that we are, and we go out and we have all these expectations of who they are, who they could be, and how they might fit into our lives. We go out looking for people with shared interests, right? We look out for people with shared upbringings, shared hometowns. We try all sorts of things that are mental heuristics, or we call them shortcuts. Actually, let's talk about what mental heuristics are. How about that? So let's talk about some fundamental truths for a second, right? And again, feel free to question my fundamental truths, because again, it's just mine. Maybe it's not yours. Just let me know if it's different for you. But my fundamental truth is that everybody lies, not maliciously, but people like to please. We use mental heuristics, which are called mental shortcuts, right? And this is the official definition. They're mental shortcuts that help us process, helps us, kind of solve problems and make judgments quickly and efficiently. I did not spell that right. Judgments quickly and efficiently. These are rule of thumb shortcuts that shorten decision-making time and allow people to function without constantly stopping to think about their next course of action. And you can see how this is really helpful if you're in like a fight or flight situation, right? If you are currently, you need to make a split-second decision about something, make a split-second, analysis of what the situation is. Yes, mental heuristics are really useful, but in today's society, when especially human relationships, whether it be intrapersonal again or interpersonal, it's a lot more complex than that. And if we decide to jump to the gun on hey, this person is good for me versus this person is not good for me because of things that we observe on a physical level, right, on a visual level, and or what they say and not versus what they do. Essentially, we're going to make a fool of ourselves at the end of the day. And I'm not saying that this is 100% of the time. I'm just saying that this is often. And I have personal anecdotes that I can share that kind of revolve around this kind of idea. So let's try to align this, okay? And I want to define two things for us, okay? The two things I want to define and I want to get into your guys' head is the concept of static variables, okay? Which I kind of consider as, useful but bad, and I'll explain what that means. And what I call fundamentals. So we're gonna put them on the side of each other. We'll call them fundamentals. And if you're getting a bit lost, when we're talking about this, is more like a theory, right? And if you're getting a bit lost, it's totally fine. Just let me know, right? But essentially, the idea is that we finish talking about the theory, then we'll go into the practical, which is the action, like template, and then hopefully at the end of all that, you can see how they all correlate. But we'll get there. So, static variables, what are they? They help us understand people. What do I mean? Well, if I want to understand someone, I look at their interests, right? I look, what are they interested in? What are they interested in, right? Photography, movies, technology, anything, TV shows. Basically, we TV shows. We basically use static variables as a way for us to help understand who people are. If they've education level, even we can talk about race, religion, political affiliation, a hometown, where they grew up. These are all ways that we try to understand who someone is without talking to them for a very long time, right? If we look at someone's education level, and let's say they have had post-secondary education, we might assume that they are interested in studying. We might assume that they're interested in constant learning, constant growth, right? That would be an assumption that wouldn't be too unreasonable to make, right? And if we see that someone is interested in photography and I'm also interested in photography, let's say, then I can maybe reasonably assume that they're kind of similar to me, because if they're interested in photography, then they may think the same way I do about how composition of nature and how nature is beautiful and we should preserve nature, and maybe by the end of the day they're a earth conservative, conservatist and all those kind of things, and Mario is asking a good question. Would mental heuristics apply to everyone? There are many people that are comfortable with doing the same thing always. Well, I gotta break that down for a second. One is that mental heuristics definitely applies to everyone. Well, even if people try to be like, hey, I have no bias, right? Because mental heuristics is basically cognitive bias. Well, let me put that down because that's a good point. So, cognitive bias, right? Cognitive bias. Basically, this is where I think even a lot of bigotry can come from, and it's unfortunate, but it's because when people get something shocking that happens in their life, right? Let's say someone gets a big betrayal, or a big tragedy happens to them, and it was conducted to them by a certain group of people, by someone that represents a certain group of people, right? Whether it be race, whether it be gender, whether it be someone that from a certain state or a certain country, and then you're like, well, just to be safe, right? Your brain is telling you, hey, just to be safe, I'm going to make sure that I don't ever encounter any of these people again, because the limited interactions I've had with this group of people has made me sad, has made me feel bad, has made me have tragedy or betrayal, all those kind of things. And just to be safe until I can collect myself again and make better informed longer term decisions, I'm gonna say for the short term, I don't care for this group of people, and this group of people can just right off. That's cognitive bias. And again, you can see how it might protect you, right? And let's say, when back in the olden days, caveman times, if we encountered a snake, right? And we saw a snake on the ground, and and then we didn't know what a snake was, and the snake bit us on our ankle, and now we're in terrible pain because of the venom. We're probably gonna avoid snaky objects in the future. We're probably gonna be like, well, let's not walk near snakes. I don't know which snake is poisonous, which is not. All snakes are bad for now. I'm just gonna avoid them all until I get the knowledge that, oh, not all snakes are bad. Some snakes have green stripes. Some snakes have, polka dots. Some snakes have, different patterns, and I can use those to then determine which ones are the ones that are dangerous for me, which ones are the ones that actually have venom in their fangs, which ones don't, right? So that's an example of where cognitive bias kind of is useful, back in the olden days. But again, the context of today's personal relationships doesn't really make sense. And then the last bit of what you're asking is, there's many people that are comfortable with doing things the same way always. I don't specifically understand what you mean by that, and maybe you could tell me a bit more about what you think, what you were thinking of that sentence. But my way of thinking is, we all have fundamentals that we act upon, and the static variables actually are a derivative of fundamentals. Like if we talk about, and I guess this is where we can start mapping out something interesting, right? Where if I were to talk about, what is the above. So let me show you how this works too. So basically, this works like this. I can zoom in a little bit, I believe, get in bigger. So basically, this is the mental model, and hopefully this actually helps understanding a bit more. Okay, so let's add a title. That's a title here. This framework for asking good questions. And then let's talk about traditionally. So if I use the Alt keys, by the way, Alt key duplicates an item. If I click and drag, and then if I press space, I can drag on like this. So that's pretty cool. So framework for asking good questions is going to be the general title here. It's going to make this large, a centered item. And then we're going to make this also a centered item. And this one, we're going to talk about traditionally, okay, also centered. And then this should be here, and we call this, but instead we should. So traditionally, right, what we do is we go and we find, say, hey, what are the static variables that I trust? Traditionally, when we decide to have better, traditionally I'll explain that for a second, right? But let's go back for a second. I've set up this this part for now, but I want to continue talking about this static variable because I want to explain this just a little more. So static variables help us understand people. They help us. What happened? Yeah, they help us align with others' behavior. So if we think, well, if they are interested in XXX or have attributes like XXX, they have a higher chance of thinking like I do, right? For example, if they grew up where I grew up, right? If they have the same race, the same religion, the same political affiliation as I do, it's not a stretch to believe that they believe in the same things I do, that they have the same fundamentals as I do. What I'm trying to express here in today's conversation is that might not be true, because everybody has different ways of expressing their fundamentals in form of the static variables. Like a good example I have in the past would be like, obviously you can't assume that all people that go to church, for example, are the same kind of people. Obviously, a lot of people that go to church do have the mindset that they should be serving others and they should be, having others' best interests in mind. Love your neighbor. But not everybody that goes to church is like that, obviously, right? We now know that everyone is different. But most of us like to say, well, if we go to church, then 80% of people shouldn't be that bad, right? And I'm saying that yes, again, it's a shortcut. Probably helps you cut down on a lot of bad people in your life. But are you going to write off all the people in your life that don't go to church and may be good people for you, right? How can you actually understand who the good people are for you, especially even after you get into that kind of environment and you're like, well, great, I still can't assume everyone's good here. I have to see, who really is good for me, right? So there's 3 conclusions I have about static variables and why I think that they are, while helpful, not necessarily the best thing to use when we're trying to make good decisions about who people are, including ourselves. So, and let's call them SV, right? Just for short form. So static variables SV. So SV helps you find other people. There's usually places of congregation for static variables. Again, religion, you go to church. Education level, you go to alumni clubs. If you're interested in photography, movies, technologies, whatever, there's forums for that. There's in-person clubs for that. There's hobby groups. If hometown, obviously you can find them in your hometown, or also hometown Facebook groups and stuff like that. So using static variables as a way to find people is very convenient. Find them very easily. But the issue is that static variables changes often because of life experiences. How often do you have, an interest that you've held for, decades, right? Yes, sure, there are, but your interests will change over time, and your political affiliation may change over time. Your education definitely changes over time. You're going to learn more, stuff like that. So your static variables often change because of life experiences, right? And then the last thing is static variables causes expectations, which equals to unhappiness, because expectations are the roots of all unhappiness, right? And we know that. And the thing about static variables, why it causes expectations, is because, well, when we use static variables to kind of try to understand others, be like, hey, if they like X, then they should behave like Y because I like X and I behave like Y, then you're setting yourself up for failure because, again, it's not a one-to-one relationship. Just because they have the same static variables as you do, just because they're the same interests as you do, just because they have the same education as you do, just because even if they have the same hometown, race, religion, political affiliation, whatever, does not mean they think like you, right? That's cognitive bias. So if you have expectations because of that, you're going to be unhappy. I talked to someone recently, and it's someone I care a lot about, a good friend of mine. And he was sharing that, I'm looking for a partner, a life partner. And I was like, oh, cool. What have you kind of decided that you're looking for in a partner? And you guys might also kind of align with this because it's a common story, right? And they have to start listing. It's almost like a checklist, right? Oh, they gotta be, they gotta have this level of education. They gotta have this kind of personality. They gotta be interested in this TV show series. They gotta be They gotta be, this religion. They gotta be this political affiliation. They gotta be, this race. You gotta be born in this country. I was like, wow, that's really specific, man. You're really going to the nitty gritty of all these things. And I'm like, but what if, you guys start dating and, a year in, they don't like that TV show anymore? What's going to happen? Are you just not going to like them anymore? Like, what are you trying to really understand by saying that, hey, I want them to enjoy the same TV shows as I do, right? That's unfortunately a symptom, I think, of today's kind of understanding. Because again, these are things that are not really taught in school. And that's my whole goal here. I'm trying to teach things that I have, gone through so much trial and tribulation to kind of learn for myself and hopefully pass it on if it's important and interesting to you guys. But essentially, like, if you got to really understand what you're trying to ask. What is the real underlying question, the real fundamental you're trying to get to, right? Because when you try to ask these kind of questions and expect something, and again, I'll say it again and again, expectations are the root cause of unhappiness, right? If you expect things that are out of your control, that's where you kind of, are not only betraying yourself, but you cause yourself to start thinking that everyone's betraying you. Oh, nobody understands me, right? Nobody cares about me. Nobody understands me. You start having those kind of very downhearted conversations to yourself, and those are conversations I think are not only unproductive but not necessarily good for you. So, as a conclusion for static variables is that they, mental heuristics help us make faster decisions, but not necessarily better decisions, and that's really important. So if I were to go back to the framework for asking good questions, so traditionally we look for static variables that we trust, and generally the most trusted would be static variables that we have, right? So if we have interest in XYZ, if we were grown up in whatever hometown, then we always would trust those static variables more. And you guys see that, right? It's something obvious to say, because we definitely feel like we bond better with people that have the same kind of background we do. We bond better with people that have the same interests as we do. That's just a very normal thing. And then we hold implicit expectations of what having that static variable means in terms of fundamental values / behavior, right? So because they behave like me, and I'm gonna put a sentence here also to help kind of hash that, they behave like, or they like the same things I do / grew up the same way, so they must think the same way I do, right? That's basically what you're talking about, right? And basically, so if I connect the two, right, so this is from here to here, we look for static variables, then we hold implicit expectations, and then unfortunately, at the end of the day, and again, I'm not saying this not 100% of the time, right? I'll caveat, not 100% of the time, but we get disappointed, 1 to 2 years or whatever significant commitment later, that they actually aren't like you, and you feel betrayed. And at that point you might make, and I'll expand this flowchart in a different way later, but essentially, like, there's many ways that you can feel betrayed, and there's many things you can do about that betrayal, but oftentimes we try to rationalize that, and that's where I think we end up being around people that are not good for us, because we rationalize time commitment that we spent already in these kind of relationships, and we're like, well, we've already spent so much time together, they're my best friend, so we might as well stay friends forever, and maybe that's not the right thing to do, just maybe. And that's my point of view. So and this, you see that this also works for yourself. I want to explain why. Is because we often say a lot to ourselves a lot of times, like, because let's say, because we play video games, right? I'm a lazy person because video games are associated with lazy people, and maybe that just got stuck in your head because of outside influences of whatever your parents said to you, whatever your teacher said to you, and you're like, okay, well, playing video games equals lazy, therefore I'm lazy, and then you use that as a way to judge yourself. You're like, well, that's a mental shortcut, and I can't change that. Well, too bad, I'm a gamer, so I'm a lazy person, and therefore I'm going to act in a lazy way. I think that's a bit sad, because obviously not all gamers are lazy. And I think some gamers are the most productive people I know, at least in a gaming sense of point of view. It's just about channeling your energy in a different way. So my approach here is that using kind of outward facing ideas or variables is not the best way to understand someone. And I'm going to take a quick second to drink some water, but I want to hear what you guys have to think about. Is there any other static variables that you think I'm missing? Any other static variables that you find yourself using as a way to make quickly judgments on someone, see if they're, kind of your kind of people, your tribe, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, Sebastian, I think using mind maps and using like these kind of how do you call them, flowcharts, right? They're super useful to start like digging into behavior, especially when you start thinking like when you start trying to map out your own mental process. How did I go from A to B to C? Why do I do Z at the end of the day? Where do like how does it all kind of flow? What decade were you born in? Age? I think that's really good too. Yes, 100%, Chris. Absolutely right. Like age, right? Um, let's call it, generation. People love to segment on generation, right? Whether it be older people, thinking that younger people won't understand them because they haven't been through the same experiences, or younger people determining that they can't bond with older people because of the generation gap. Like again, I think all these things are very like it's a quick and easy way, right, to kind of make quick judgments, flash judgments I call them, about whether or not you can get along with people with that person. But as we all know, especially even in our community, right, we have people of all sorts of different thinking, of different all sorts of different backgrounds, generations and all that kind of thing, but we all still bond because of the fundamental. And this is where it gets super super interesting. So let's talk about this. Okay, so people actually want to know this, but they don't ask the right questions. Okay, when people ask when people try to figure out all the static variables, is they actually want to know the fundamentals, but they just don't ask the right questions. I truly believe, right? I believe that nobody actually would care about the static variable if they had a reliable way to figure out the fundamental mindset underneath. What do I mean by that? Well, this is the way I think, I'm not saying I'm going to solve bigotry, around the world or solve racism or anything like that, but like, I think if you actually had like a consistent way of figuring out what people actually believe, what people actually think, you're not going to be so, judgmental on surface level, variables. You're not going to judge someone based on their age. You're not going to judge someone based on their race or their political affiliation. You're not going to judge someone based on where they grew up or their education level or what they're interested in, because you actually know that behind everything, they actually think like you, and you know that for a fact because you've asked their questions. I think this would effectively make people a lot less judgmental, and I think that just makes everyone a lot happier. Like, wouldn't you like to be friends with someone because of something that is very rare to change? Because fundamentals don't really change, right? Once you have a mindset that you've adopted, don't really change. And this is why I think our community is so strong, because we have 3 mindsets that we adopt that I value very deeply, and I think everybody in our community values deeply, at least 2 or 3 of them. And this is why we all get along. And this is where I want to explain more about this. So what are the 3 mindsets that I value and I subscribe to? Well, growth mindset, truth mindset, and tenacity mindset. This is seek discomfort. And then I have a few more mindsets that I'm going to add in later that were graciously submitted by our community, that our mindsets are also important to them. But I just want to start with these to kind of give you guys an understanding of what I'm trying to talk about. So first, let's define what these mindsets are for a second. Let me grab something here. Let me grab the information I have, which is, let's go to Lab. Yeah, Chris, we'll see you later. Yeah, feel free to watch our video. Yeah, Mario, exactly. Like, mental heuristics are definitely tools, helps us solve problems quickly, but they are symptoms of, you know, a bigger problem, I'd say, especially in today's society. I would say there's more nuances that we have to be mindful of, and yeah, I mean, more ways that we can kind of see how we can be mindful of them is pretty important. So I'm just gonna paste something here because I've already typed this out before. But what is a growth mindset? What is a truth mindset? What is seek discomfort? These are kind of what I believe in. So basically, you know, I'll quickly talk about it. Let's make these heading 3, you know, growth mindset. I'm gonna make this a truth mindset. 3, truth mindset. This one is gonna be about seeking discomfort. So in a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talents are just a starting point. This view creates a love of learning and a resilience that is essential for great accomplishments. This is direct quote from a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. Amazing, amazing book. You guys should all read it if you haven't read it already. But basically, the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset is that someone in a fixed mindset would always be saying statements like, you know, I can't change. You know, I'm just the way I am. You know, I was born this way. You know, or you know, things in my life have happened in a certain way that has made me unable to be different. You know, I am the way I am, and I can't change that. Unfortunately, that's a symptom of a fixed mindset, and it's very hard for you to improve if you think that, if you're always telling yourself that you can't change because of external factors that are impending you. Truth mindset is, you know, being honest as you can so you can achieve your true goals and find more meaning in your lives. Because honestly, lying to yourself only cheats us out of your own future. And the idea is that in every debate or conversation, we treat what we currently know as theories to be proven and are generally pleased to be proven wrong because it means we learn something new. And every discussion is an opportunity to find the truth. There's what you know, what I know, and there's the truth. Let's find it together, right? Let's find it together. And then seek discomfort. You know, we try to constantly challenge ourselves, get out of our comfort zones. The more time we spend being uncomfortable, the faster our comfortable zone expands, right? We get more comfortable with more things. And the maximum growth occurs when we leave our comfort zones to investigate chaos and find interesting and new ways to solve problems that we probably would not have found before. And the benefit is that we're actually anchored and supported by the community while we conduct these kind of exploratory missions and share with everybody what we have learned. So these are the 3 mindsets that I subscribe to personally. And then the question comes with like, okay, well, how can we find these things without finding these things, right? For example, like, you know, a mental heuristic that I used in the past was like, okay, well, if they had a good education, if they went to university, and if they studied the same kind of courses I did, right? If they went to, you know, medical school and, you know, they're studying the sciences, then I was like, oh, they're probably in a growth mindset, right? They probably want to keep learning and learning and learning and want to, you know, and have a resilience, because you can't get into medical school without, you know, just by like, if you don't have like a strong desire to be there and a resilience for learning. But as I found out very quickly, not everyone is like that. They're there possibly because they just, you know, had another reason for being there, where, you know, they wanted to get fame, they wanted to get glory, they wanted to, you know, just be, you know, it's not about love of learning that keeps them there, but rather, you know, it's just a profession that they should get into, that they want to get into. So that's the interesting thing about this, is that these are actually the, you know, if we use the mental heuristics to determine the fundamentals, again, we're getting ourselves into a lot of trouble, because if what we're actually trying to understand is if they would always want to develop their most basic abilities and grow, then you might as well ask the direct question, and I guess even observe the direct things that get you closer to this. Another example that I wanted to share that was you know, brought about by one of our community members was basically, you know, positive mindset and also respectful mindset. You know, how do you determine these mindsets beforehand? And another example I want to give then is that, for example, you might believe that someone that does volunteering on their weekends probably is a very serving person. They probably want to serve others. They're probably very respectful, and they probably want to they probably want to better humanity in some way, right? That's generally the kind of stereotype that kind of falls between for people that are givers, right? Well, if they spend time out of their week to go out and do volunteering, they must be givers. Now, the issue with that again is that everybody has different underlying truths that drive them to act the way they do. Now we know about this is that, after all this conversation for the last hour, basically we understand that, hey, just because they behave in a certain way or they do a certain thing or they affiliate with a certain group does not always mean that they hold the true mindset that is behind the entire group. So that's where I'm going with this, and that's why I want that to make sure that's very important and on top of your mind. And I'm gonna finish making this simple chart, and then I want to go into the action, right? We're gonna start talking about the action. What can we do about this? We download the problem. Kind of sucks. That's fine. How do we get better? How do we get better asking good questions? How do we get better at understanding the people that are around us, and most importantly, ourselves? So we talk about the traditionally, right? But instead, what we should is ask the right questions that would directly correlate with the fundamental mindsets. So instead of values, behavior, let's call them mindsets. I think that's much better. So mindsets. Okay. And then if we have to, this is where I'm going to go, like, if we must, and this is an optional idea, use static variables as a way to find more people, right? Because again, it's useful in that way. I'm not going to say it's not useful, right? To find more people that would have a higher likelihood of being the same mindset as you. But the thing is that, use the mindset as a base to then extrapolate what static variables may well, first of all, use the mindset as a way to align on ways of thinking and understand each other better, right? And then make better relationships based on fundamentals. Like, this is where I think is the important thing. Let's draw this arrow here. Draw this arrow here. Is there any questions that you guys have about this so far? Like, I think this is a big idea, and I may not be explaining myself properly. I may not be explaining it perfectly, so I do want to know where I may be losing you guys so I can better explain and better guide, because obviously this is a collaborative thing. I don't think I have all the answers just yet either, but this is like the starting point. This is where I want people to start thinking like, hey, maybe the way that we currently judge others is not the best way. Maybe there's a better way to judge and really get to the bottom of what we actually care about. Yeah, so Nadine, we're gonna talk about how now. Yeah, how it's gonna be our now. So I guess then the why and the what are clear, right? So if the why and what are clear, we can go with the now. All right, let's go to now. So exactly. Okay, so Dean, you got a really good point. That's the one I want to make, is that people always say they've changed. But you got to think about it. What actually changed? It's these things that have changed, you know? It's static variables that's changed after time. Because again, static variables change because of life experiences, you know? People that got together because of their shared love of movies, they may have different interests in movies over time. One might like horror, one might like, one might like comedy, and maybe the way that they appreciate movies have changed too. Like, this is where I think a lot of unhappiness comes from. Marriage is the best case that we can make, is that because the parties involved never actually bothered, I guess, to understand the mindset behind everything. They looked at only the static variables, and when the static variables change, they're caught off guard and they don't know, oh my god, you've changed. But in reality, nothing actually changed. They actually still believe in the same things here, right? Like, why I think our community works so well while we subscribe to these mindsets is because, well, we leave, for example, for truth mindset, we leave ego at the door. It doesn't matter what we currently think right now about any, worldview or any kind of problem in the world or any kind of objective, because we have a truth mindset. It doesn't matter if we're wrong. We just want to find out what the truth is, and therefore it doesn't matter what we actually think about anything, right? We're always just trying to figure out what's reality. So that's kind of where I think, a lot of the static variables are what makes people unhappy, and therefore if we can just look past them just a little bit, that's where, even for example, like, partners change after marriage, that would change. Like, that wouldn't be a problem anymore. Okay. Mario says, I haven't fully understood what might be like the essentials to be in an open-minded mindset. I guess we will always judge internally in a certain way, right? Yes, you'll always judge in a certain way, and that's totally fine. And I'm not looking down on judgment. Again, it's useful. I mentioned the snake analogy, right? You're probably saving yourself from a world of pain if you're just avoiding all snakes altogether until you actually know which snakes are good, right? What I'm saying is that what we're doing here, what we're trying to build, is that framework to get to, like, which snakes are good for you, right? Which people within that group that traditionally has causing you pain, which of them are good for you? That's where I'm going. Let's show you how to embed whimsical boards into your Notion page. So what you do is you press this button here, share, export, and print, get shareable link. I want to enable public link access because we need to do that. Then we're going to pull it into here. We're going to just paste it, click Control V, embed a whimsical board. And you can see that instantly the whimsical board shows up, and you can see your board. Oop, and you can see your board right here. So that's a pretty good way to embed a board, and we can even make it a bit more interactive in a little bit, but this is essentially the first step. Okay, cool. Let's talk about the how. The how is the important bit. So let's make a database. So I love making databases because I think it's a good way to make our learning more actionable. So how can we avoid these pitfalls? Right. So let's say one more time, because I think this is important. People are not lying to be malicious. People are not generally maliciously lying, but they want to please. So there's an example where, like, I'm guilty of this too, and I'm trying to explain this in a way that kind of makes sense. Where, like, there's a time in my life I was like, screw it, I don't think anybody understands me. I don't think anybody, really gets me, right? So, and the people I want to surround myself with somehow aren't there. So I'm just gonna speak out loud. I'm gonna be like, okay, I want people that are like, X, Y, and Z. Again, almost like how my friend says, hey, I want all these static variables. and then And then obviously people that want to be your friend, obviously people that want to be around you, they say, oh yeah, I'm like that, lo and behold, the next day, we meet, they are completely different. They are that kind of person because, they want to be pleased, they want to be appreciated, right? And you're out there telling people that, hey, I want to have X, Y, and Z static variable. And obviously people that want to be around you, they're going to try to adopt those behaviors. You try to be more like someone that you like. And the issue of that, as now we know, is like that's not truthful. And it's almost like, since Nadine brought up the relationship aspects, or like marriage, right? I mean, it's almost a joke now, but people often say like, oh, just tell your wife what she wants to hear, right? And this is something that you guys have heard a lot, I'm sure, right? You guys, it's not the first time you heard this. Oh, just tell her what she wants to hear, get it over with. And I think fundamentally that's like the wrong thing. If you guys were on the same mindset, you would never say something like, oh, just tell her what she wants to hear, because it obviously means it's not something that you want to say, right? So how can we get to the point where it's something that you want to say and it's something that they want to hear? I think that's the point that I'm trying to get across is, how can you be your most authentic self? And I want to write that down. How can you help yourself and others be the most authentic you can be? This is the point. So there's three main fundamentals I'm going to talk about that are going to come into play when we start building this database. Okay, so the first one is talk about them instead of about you. One big issue when we have conversations is we often walk away from conversations feeling like we don't actually know anything more about the other person, but we feel good about the conversation because we talk about ourselves. Everybody likes to talk about ourselves. And when we talk about ourselves a lot in the conversation, we feel good about it. We feel like we bonded somehow because, by all means, it's everything that we care about, right? It's things that we say that came out of our mouth, so therefore we care about them. That's the issue, first of all, is that we often, just by the way we behave, we don't talk about them, so therefore we don't really understand them. We help out ourselves. And therefore we place our expectation of who they are based on what we're saying out loud. So that's first thing. That's gonna be like a fundamental overarching idea that we need to avoid. We should ask about specifics in the past instead of generics or opinions about the future. Anybody can say that they're a good person. Anybody can say that if given, $1 million and, copious amounts of time, that they're going to save the world. Anybody can say like, hey, in the future, I'm going to pursue great things, career paths, great mindsets, anything. Opinions are cheap, but if you anchor people to the specifics of actions that they've made in the past that would indicate future behavior, that's a lot more reliable. Again, that's not fully reliable either. People can change things they do in the past, maybe of different reasons. That's fine. I'm just saying that if we use hypotheticals in the future as a way to gauge if people would behave in that way, that's flawed. I'll give you an example. So, something that people love to ask in relationships are like, oh, if I was sickly and unwell, would you take care of me? Would you stay around? If I was, poor and I was broke, and all those kind of things, would you still stand by my side? And while those are great lovey-dovey questions to ask, and great answers to give, right? Oh yeah, but I'll be there for you. Saying it is really easy, but when it actually happens, it may not be as you anticipated. And you might be upset. Oh, you told me that you were going to stand by me. You told me that you were going to be there for me. And sure, they may have said that, but they are not trying to be dishonest. when they told you that they would at the time, because it's just a hypothetical in the air. It's really easy for them to say yes, because you're obviously fishing for an answer. You're not asking for them to say no. You want them to say yes. You want to say yes, of course. 100%. I'm with you all the way. You know? And people just want to please. So in those kind of situations, that's something that you want to avoid. You want to instead talk about specifics in the past and avoid opinions, right? So that's the idea there. And then the last thing is, I guess, a repeat of the first idea, but it's important, is talk less and listen more. So I think instead, actually, what I mean by the first one, and I want to be more specific then, is talk about their behaviors instead of your ideals. Like, again, I keep going back to the to like a relationship point of view, because I think it's just more obvious than most people are more critical of relationships anyways. And it's a good way to kind of bridge the gap of understanding, at least for our context in our conversation today. But basically, like, if we instead talk about the behaviors of how they act instead of what your ideal is about how people should act, you're giving people less chances to lie about how they would behave in situations. And again, it's really important for you to not prime people's answers, right? This is about priming. So if I could summarize this in one word, this is about priming. You don't want to prime people for answers. This is about avoiding opinions, or called opinions are cheap. And this one is seek to understand before being understood. Okay, so these are the three big ideas that we're going to talk about. So let's go into the database, the fun part. All right, so let's build a database, and let's call it the questioning framework. I don't have a better name for it right now. If you guys have a better name, let me know. If you have a better way of explaining what this might be, let me know. But essentially, the questioning framework is like, we have, let's call this a better question to ask. We're going to have this be the fundamental mindset. We're gonna have something called possible answers, and let's also have one called static variables, just in case we want to work backwards too. And this is where everyone can start chiming in, okay? Because I think it'll get really intuitive. Once this mental idea is unlocked in your mind, it gets really intuitive, and I'm so excited for you guys to get involved. I'm also going to make new databases called this the fundamental mindset, because I want this to be a relational property. Again, if we want to find that out backwards later on. And then I want to make another one as well, another table. We're going to call this static variables. This one is going to be a text. This one is going to be a relation, where it's fundamental mindset. Fundamental mindset. This one is going to be a relation, static variables. Static variables. Awesome. And then what we're going to here is we're just going to delete a few of the other properties for now. We're not going to use it yet. This property for now, delete property. Then we're going to call this the questioning frame, or this is called the question to ask. And then also call this the question to ask. And we're gonna start filling this in, right? So let's put the fundamental mindsets I cared about up here. So I'm gonna help about growth mindset, truth mindset, seek discomfort. I'm gonna call it positive mindset, and let's also add on the respectful mindset. Okay, static variables. We talked about a bunch. I'm just gonna copy and paste because it's a bit interesting. So static variables, interested in photography, education level, race, religion, political affiliation, hometown, age. So that's that. And then we might even want to say interest in TV shows, etc. etc. That list can really go on, right? So, and we can definitely add more later. Okay, so let's come up with some simple examples first that are going to be, I guess, helpful, like almost like comedic in its way that people like obviously know, right? So I want to start off with a simple example. Let me think for a second. Be the most simple to start with. Yeah, Dean, you have a good point. Like, I want to add on is like, yes, 100%. Like, worldviews can change too, and I'll call them mindsets, right? So worldviews can definitely change, and but usually it's because of more drastic life changes that changes people's worldviews. Like, your mindset doesn't often change unless you have a big tragedy in your life that makes you really think a lot differently. And that's why I say fundamentals to gauge people's behaviors is a lot more reliable. But then, of course, why I'm using the databases to keep static variables in the mix is because, again, static variables it's a mental shortcut. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm just saying that it's not like you should disregard an entire class of people just because they don't fit the static variables you're looking for. That may indicate certain mindset. Because the really interesting thing is that the most interesting thing I want to express here is that, like, the mindset may have different ways of manifestation. Like, you might find out that someone has the same mindset as you, even though they're completely in a different geography, right? Even if they're completely in a different walk of life, different career, a different, they may have a completely different, interest as you, right? But they may still have the same mindset. That's where I want to say, like, those are the true friends you want to keep. Because think about it, like, when most people say, like, hey, I have a really good friend, and most people's really good friends are not people that 100% are their carbon copies, right? Or they might not even have 100% of the same interests, but because they think and believe in the same thing, same worldview. That's where I'm aiming for that. Okay, so I want to say is that, like, okay, so let's start here. Got it. We want to talk about, let's say, let's say someone's education level, right? Is something that you want to gauge. It's like, hey, are you in a growth mindset or not, right? So let's talk about that. So we have a static variable for education level. What we actually want to know is if they're in a growth mindset or not, right? Again, you see that this is kind of linking together. The better question, in my opinion, ask if someone is in a growth mindset or not. It's like, do you believe, right? Or again, those are opinions. So I'm gonna give you like a bad question. I'm gonna give you a good question, right? A bad question might be like, generally we ask like, hey, do you believe that your mindset, you can constantly learn new things, right? And some people might be honest about that. Some people might be like, I don't think I can believe that. I don't think I believe that. And that's the end of it. You already know, hey, they're probably not in the growth mindset. They probably don't believe that they can learn new things. But this is where, like, this is interesting conversation. Again, one of my goals here is that I want us to have better conversations than just saying like, hey, how are you? How's your day? I want to get to the deep and thick of this. And I think, this is one of the reasons why I think Sean and some others have mentioned, like, I ask really good questions that get people thinking, is because I constantly challenge myself. It's like, what am I really trying to understand out of this like limited 10, 20 minute, 30-minute conversation that I have with that are in my life, right? So it's all about getting into a train of thought and then continue asking really good questions. And this is where honestly the mind mapping and the flowchart comes in too. So let's just say we start here, right? And that's fine. You can start off with opinion first because you're trying to get into a proper flow of answers. Because what you're looking for here is you're looking for, okay, so do you believe you can constantly learn new things? You might say, well, there's only really two answers, right? Yes or no. And actually, let's make this into the flowchart now. I think this would be fun. So let's make this into a flowchart. Let's go back to the boards. We're gonna add a flowchart here. We're gonna call this one the, do you believe you can constantly learn? Do you are learning new things? It's gonna be the title. And then our question here was, do you believe you can constantly learn things? Add a text. It's gonna be a large, centered. Okay, so that's the question, and let's talk about the answer. So there's two answers here. So yes or no. Okay, so there's a yes question, there's a yes answer, there's a no answer. And the fun part, because we're actually mind mapping. And this is such an ugly, oh, there we go. Yes, I believe so. No, I do not. And I'm not saying you should write off people that say no, I do not, and I'll explain how to like actually get to understand them better, because some people might just be like, oh, why are you asking that? You know, what are you trying to get to? And they might be suspicious. But let me talk about that. So yes, I believe so. Then you would say, right, when was the last time you learned something new, right? Again, back to the fundamental principle here is we ask about specifics in the past instead of in the future. Sometimes people might ask, oh, you know, what new things do you want to learn? Like, what's on your bucket list? And that's a horrible, horrible question, because people have so many things on their bucket list that they're never going to accomplish, unfortunately. And I'm not looking down on people in general. I'm just saying that a lot of people have goals, right? A lot of people have, you know, pipe dreams that are, you know, way off in the future. And it'll be amazing to say, hey, I want to learn Japanese. I want to learn, you know, 20 languages. I want to, you know, learn how to code. You know, everybody says those kind of things, but do they actually execute on them? This is how you can find out, right? So you anchor them into the past. Okay, so I'm gonna put comments on the side on like why this is so important. Anchoring, okay? Get them to talk about specifics that happened in the past rather than a bucket list for the future. Okay, and these are all scientific, like so just in case, you know, for the ones that don't know my background, like I studied neuroscience and psychology at university. Those were my majors and specialties. Like these are proper, like scientifically research-based, you know, techniques in order to get people to not tell so many lies, for lack of a better word, right? Or actually get to the crux of the core of what you're trying to get towards. So anchoring is important. So this is anchoring, right? You're getting them to talk about the past, specifics that happened in the past rather than a bucket list for the future. So super important here. Let's make this a smaller text. And then, you know, then the next question is, cool, so what's the response? And let's make responses, give me a fun color for responses, guys. What's a good color? Yellow responses? Or maybe we can make the colors indicative of if they're good answers or bad answers. Maybe that's the right answer. Yellow, but then if it's their response, then it should be dash maybe, yeah. And then if it's your answer, let's make it a, no, your answer could just be white. Okay, your answer will be white. And then let's make this blue. Okay, so when is the last time you learned something new? And they might respond, it's like, oh, you know, there's only a few answers, right? Either like a long time ago, you know, 1 year plus, and then a long time ago, 1 year plus, then say like this is a medium long, this is like 6 months roughly, and then recently days, 2 weeks, 2 months. Okay, and then this is how they can be responding. Again, there's no perfect answer here, I would say, and I'll explain what that means in a sec. Oh my gosh, this is not working out. What is wrong with that? Here, let's add this here like this. Also add this here like this. Okay, so we ask when's the last time you learned something new. They give you 3 answers, and then you can have deeper conversations about this. It's like whatever they ask is like, oh, what was it, right? What did you learn? And then I'm just gonna put a lot of questions down here because these are the questions I would follow up with, like what was your process, right? What was your process? And essentially here is like where I would ask like the why, what, and hows. Okay, so basically what did you learn? What was your how did, so this is more like how did you learn it? How did you learn it? And then also why do you want to learn it? That's also important, why do you want to learn that? Why did you want to learn that? Again, in the past. Okay, what did you learn? What did you learn first? What it is, and then why, and then how. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the actual like responses in a sec, but I want to already like talk about like, hey, this is super interesting because you've already gotten better conversation. Like I really want to put that into your minds, like just by asking like a really interesting question the first like 2 sentences, that when you're talking to someone you get to know 3 really cool things. The first thing is that obviously you get to know their fundamental principle, like do they want to learn new things or not, and that probably can help define if you want to be better friends with them or not, right? And then the second thing you're learning is that, hey, you're actually getting to know something that matters to them, because if they're going out to learn something new, then obviously that matters to them. And when you ask like what did you learn and why did you want to learn that, you learn more about them. For example, if they said, oh, I wanted to learn a new language, I want to learn Japanese. Why did you want to learn that? Well, because I'm planning to go to Japan in the near future. Oh, cool, and now all of a sudden randomly that they actually have a goal, a dream to go to Japan, and or maybe and how did you learn it? And then they can teach you, oh, I used X resource and Y resource, and I took Duolingo classes and I did everything else. And it's super interesting because all of a sudden now you learn new skills through them, right? You learned a bit more about the motivations behind why they do certain things, growth mindset, and also in terms of their personal goals and desires. And then you can also learn specifically like how recent were they to do all this, right? Is this top of mind? Is learning something that's important to them? And this is where I want to start saying like, this is so useful for yourself as well. Let's say you want to question if you have a fixed mindset or not. Are you growth-minded thinkers, right? So you ask yourself, do I believe that I can constantly learn new things? And let's just say I say yes, right? Let's say I say yes. And I ask myself, well, what's the last time I learned something new? And then I think, well, I haven't learned something new for the last 2 years. Shoot, am I really a growth-minded thinker? Or am I a bit fixed, right? Because sometimes we like to tell ourselves nice things. Again, that's fine, right? We should. But we need to sometimes get ourselves to think, hey, am I really adopting the fundamental values that I believe in? And how am I showing that with my actions? Because if you haven't learned something new in the past however long, you can't really say that you are in a growth mindset, right? You can't really define that. And I'm saying this in a good way, because once you realize that, then what's next to do? Well, figure out what you want to learn next, right? Go out and learn something new. That's the idea here. And I'm going to talk about this no I do not, because I don't think it's a lost cause. It's not anywhere near a lost cause. It's not a lost cause at all, because this is where we can start even helping others shift their mindset to perhaps more healthy mindset. So let me talk about this. So I just talk about a lot of really key points. If you guys have questions, ask, please. These are really points, okay? And I think this is really important for everyone to understand really deeply. Okay, so here, so anchoring, talk about specific out of past, present, and bucket list for the future. It's right here. This is here we're determining the truth, right? How, if we say that we are X, how does the actions correlate, right? So truth is found, not what you say is what you do, right? It's not what you say, it's what you do. Okay, here's where we can start expanding and learning cool things, you know. Well, obviously, what did you learn? You have to know. Why is so important. Not only have you found out their inner mechanism for making decisions, you also learn a bit more about their passions and goals in life, right? And then how you learn it, how is equally as important. How is equally as important. You are essentially learning for free from someone who probably, right, recently learned a new skill and are able to reproduce the results. You know, I think this is the really key point, is because, you know, and this one could be a bit touchy, so I do want to caveat that not everyone's like this, but you know, the people around you that basically, like, you know, you go out and you try to make friends with them, and no matter what you do in life, they're not happy for you when you have successes. You know, the downers that kind of be like, you know, kind of one up you every time you say like, oh, you know, I did something new, I got this accomplished, and they're like, oh, I did something else neat better than, you know, or oh, whatever, and they dismiss you. You know, that's really sad to me, because I feel like they're giving up an opportunity to learn more about you, right? Well, why did you want to accomplish that in the first place? And how did you accomplish it? Well, maybe they can learn something new too. But no, a lot of people treat it as, you know, an attack on their own accomplishments, and have to put down others, feel better about that. And I feel that's a bit sad, really. And I think if more people adopted the mindset that, hey, actually trying to understand other people helps you learn more, helps you become a better person, helps you expand your worldview, expand your knowledge, all those kind of things, probably everyone's going to be a bit more open to having meaningful discussions. Like, I truly believe that this is one of the important aspects that makes people reconsider the way that they communicate with others. And again, this is a bigger idea, and I'm not saying everyone's like this, but I am saying that many people enjoy talking about themselves and enjoy, you know, one-upping others potentially, because they haven't understood that by listening, you end up building better relationships, and you end up learning more, better person. So that's why I wanted to get across. Let's kind of talk about the no I do nots, because the no I do nots are also very interesting, at least to me, because it gives me a really good opportunity to understand more about the person that I'm talking to, right? Like the first question is always like, you know, why? Why don't you believe so? You know, why don't you think so? And this is super interesting, because depending on what kind of position you're in, like say they're a family member, right, or someone that you care a lot about, and it's not something that you can, someone that you want to essentially cut ties with, right? Again, the whole point of this exercise is not but like, hey, you know, you don't think this way, you're gone. No. I'm not talking like that. But it also gives you a good chance to learn why some people don't subscribe to a certain mindset, and that's fine. People can do whatever they want. But this gives you a really cool opportunity to essentially understand people more deeply and help you question your worldview a bit differently. Maybe you don't want to have that mindset. Maybe that mindset is not applicable all the time. Right? Many answers, right? So why don't you think so? Gives you an opportunity. This is an opportunity. I want to say this is an opportunity. You know, learn why the mindset may not be suitable for all people, or learn why people are may misunderstand certain certain ways of thinking. Okay, so I've heard a lot of interesting answers about this because I've asked these questions a lot of times, right? So, you know, some people might say, you know, I'm not smart enough, right? Very often you hear that, right? Or, you know, I'm too old to learn, or, you know, I'm, or things like, you know, another one would be, you know, I don't like to learn for the sake of learning. And again, even if you may have decided that you don't want to be, you know, or not pretty enough, yes, so there's many different fixed mindsets that are coming out here. But like, essentially, what's happening here? And let me oh my gosh, snake. Undo that. So here, draw another one, right? That's this opportunity here. Basically, at this level, you've kind of realized that, okay, well, so what we're trying to figure out is, are they in a growth mindset or not? Remember, this is their initial, are they in a growth mindset or not? This is our original conversation. This is what we want to know. Therefore, here's like, okay, we can probably make the conclusion that this individual is fixed mindset in some way. Again, it's fine, because awareness is the first step towards any sort of progress. Oh, Lou, that's perfect. I think I will use that. I don't have enough time, right? That's perfect. I like that a lot. Thank you for that. Right, so there's 3 answers here, you know, that indicate that they obviously have some sort of barrier or some sort of mental block that stops them from wanting to pursue this behavior. And, you know, it could mean a few things. It could mean, like, you know, it's not important to them. It could mean that, you know, someone in their past has told them that, you know, you're not smart enough to learn things, or they might be really swamped in their work, meaning that they prioritize other things, other mindsets ahead of time. So like, this is where you can basically take 2 approaches, right? Again, I mentioned this one briefly. The first one briefly is like, well, if there's someone that you care about and you want them to, you know, learn from a new way of thinking, then of course, yeah, you can continue asking your questions, and I'm gonna throw a few in a sec. But also, if this was someone that you're kind of trying to gauge for a, you know, for a deeper relationship, again, whether it be interpersonal, intrapersonal, like you're asking yourself too, right? And yourself will kind of fall in the first category. You obviously want yourself to be better, so then you continue questioning, you know, why don't you think you're smart enough, and those kind of things. But you know, for people that are outside your sphere of influence, the people that you want to care about, then essentially, then you can make the decision to, you know, to go out and, you know, say, okay, well, maybe this isn't the person I want to hang out with. Sorry for a second, my camera actually just died. The battery just died. Let me put in a new battery. But yeah, like ask me questions here. Like I think this is a really meaningful spot to ask questions. Like, and we're getting close to the end of the live stream as well. Like, unfortunately, we couldn't get through too many examples because I really wanted to share like the mindset behind all this, like the theory crafting behind all this. It's important. Um, but as we go on, I'm gonna keep building more and more of these. Like this is a public repository. I'm gonna keep making sure everyone can access this. But essentially, like, you know, this can keep growing. And why I think it's so important for all of us to collaboratively work on this is because there's so many ways that we can be thinking about, you know, these mindsets, and so many better questions that even I don't have, answers that I don't have yet, right? These are just like things that I found that worked for me. But wrapping this up, because I do think it's important to finish this at least one complete questioning point. So you know, what are some questions that we could ask? Again, I will default back into the why, what, and how, right? So I'll start with why. Why do you believe this, right? Why do you believe this? Why do you believe this, right? And then they might ask a lot of questions, you know, and then you can say like, well, how? And then if you want to gear them towards, you know, the growth mindset, right? It's like, well, how do you want this to change, right? AKA, are you satisfied? Because most people, you know, are not satisfied with where their life is right now, and that's fine. That gives them an opportunity to change, because I think, you know, discomfort breeds, you know, change. Discomfort breeds momentum, and this is where, you know, I kind of want to say, like, you know, let's summarize for a second, right? What do we learn here, right? And let's go from the left hand side, because I want to really emphasize exactly the exact points of why this is important, of why this kind of questioning is important in your life. The first thing is that you are automatically a better conversationalist, okay? You're asking questions that actually matter to people. You have to remember this. People love talking about themselves, right? And someone that approaches them and gives them an opportunity to talk about their true deep inner motivations about wanting to do something is crazy in terms of motivation for them to continue opening up and wanting to talk to you more. Like, compare that with someone that approaches you and says, you know, hey, you know, how's your day, you know, or how's the weather, or, you know, all those kind of questions that don't necessarily like give me an opportunity to share more about my life. And everybody wants to share about their lives with you, whether or not, you know, it's just human nature. We want to talk about ourselves. So the first thing is, you are a better conversationalist. Let me put that down, because I think it's important. So let's talk about after the framework. So after the framework, right? One, you are a better conversationalist. Okay. Second thing, you end up learning something new, and learning something new in ways. The first way is you learn about other people's inner mechanism for making decisions, whether it be mindset driven or passion driven. These are generally the two things that make people make decisions, whether it's because, oh, this is just the way I think, therefore this is the way I behave, or I have a very passionate goal in mind that I want to chase after, and therefore I'm going to behave in a certain way to get to that end result, right? So you end up finding out other people's, so better conversationalist, you find out about other people's inner motivations without having to ask the direct question. And this is so important. I'm getting like really passionate about this, because this is so key. It's like, okay, so in the example I had, right, it was like, when's the last time you learned something new? They said maybe learning Japanese or learning a new language. You ask, why do you want to learn that? They say that it's because they want to go to whatever country in the future. Well, you know, I guarantee you, if you ask someone like just out of the blue, hey, what are your goals? What are your goals for the next, X years? They have a very hard time answering because one, it's out of the blue, but two, most people don't think of their goals that way. They don't actually think about their goals as like, oh, these are my list of goals on my bucket list. And maybe some do. Again, I'm generalizing and I shouldn't. But I'm just saying that when you give people an opportunity to answer the question indirectly based on what they have already done, that is almost like rationalizing, that, hey, yes, I do have this goal and I am making progress towards it because I've done studying, learning Japanese, for example, recently in the last month, in the last week, last day, right? It gives people that immense opportunity to relate what they do and what they say. And that's so important. I can't overestimate or over exaggerate what this specific mindset and way of thinking can do for your life. So again, the second thing is you find out other people's motivations while having to ask the direct questions, so you get more truthful answers, right? And then the third thing you're getting here is you're learning something new. There's no need for you to be jealous of other people's achievements. There's no need for you to be or envious, right? Jealous, envious, both. There's no need for you to be unhappy if other people are achieving where you don't feel like you're achieving. You don't need to feel like you're like left behind, because inadvertently, when they share the how, you are learning from their experience, and then you can also do the same thing. Why be envious of anybody's success? Like, I'm never envious of other people's success. I'm very happy when someone tells me that something good happened to them, because it gives me an opportunity to ask them how it happened, and then I can learn from that, and then I can repeat their success, especially if it was happened recently, because all the context should be the same, right? The way that they did things was fresh on their mind. The mechanism is there, and the context of the world is the same. So I can honestly just repeat what they've done, and I can get reasonably the same outputs, right? So it makes you a better person in that regard, because you get to be honestly happy and appreciative of the times that people come to you and share their successes. So how I would summarize that, I'd say you are able to appreciate other people's successes because you can then repeat the same success in your life by asking how, right? For the left side, that's the three big things that kind of can change your entire perspective of how you can communicate with others, and also about for yourself too, right? As I mentioned, these are all questions you can ask yourself. You can understand yourself a lot more based on what you've actually done versus what you say. I can say that I constantly believe I can learn new things, but if I've never learned anything new in the last year, well, maybe I should start, because I obviously want to believe in that mindset. So I should definitely try to behave in a way that fits in the mindset that I'm trying to adopt to. And actions drive behaviors drive thinking. Like, if you behave in a certain way, your mind is automatically going to help you orientate yourself towards, yes, I believe this because I behave in that way. So behavior drives belief, essentially. So the fourth point here is like, you understand yourself a lot better, because it's hard to lie to yourself when you are anchoring your words, in what you do, right? Again, it's not what you say, it's what you do that motivates others and actually proves are, right? So that's also a big part of that. And the other components, again, it's not red, it's yellow, because it's not a lost cause, is that you get a chance to understand where people's kind of stuck, especially for people that you care about in your lives. And again, including yourself. This whole framework is inter and intrapersonal. It fits everything, and that's why I think it's amazing. It's a universal framework for understanding people, and that's my absolute passion. Why did I study neuroscience? Why did I study psychology? It's because I want to understand people better, and starting with myself. So if they say I do not, right? Yes, why don't you think so? And they give you whatever answers, and even if you give yourself those answers, it gives you a chance to keep questioning, why do you believe this? How do you want this to change? And then make meaningful and actionable items that, hey, if you really want to change this and you're not satisfied with this situation, and you understand why you believe this, you kind of go backwards and you're thinking, oh, okay, this is kind of what happened in my mind. It is what happened in my past. This is what I believe. This is whoever told me this in the past. I'm not smart enough, not pretty enough. I'm too old. You don't have enough time. All those self defeating thoughts you have, essentially in one go, you can use this framework to be able to help yourself and the people you care about to actually live a better life, right? Because we don't like asking these questions. No, I dare say, like, many of you have not asked questions to yourself often because it's tough. These are tough questions to ask. And if it's someone that you care about deeply, especially someone that you want to be better, right? And again, this is kind of bridging the category of like, hey, is what you believe as better really better? Fine, whatever. that's another topic for another time. But for example, it's like if they also believe that they want to be in a certain mindset, and they believe that they want to change, and they know where the defeating thought comes from. This is where you can be so immensely helpful to the people you love and you care about. So how I would summarize this is essentially can be more helpful for the people you care about in your life to help them foster stronger mindsets and defeat, limiting beliefs. That's the big picture here. And you're going to see as time goes on, right? Let's show you what the vision is. I'm going to delete this possible answer thing, realize it's bigger. Is that in the future, what's going to happen is, we're going to have a master database, a public repository, right? I want to make this as public as possible, that says, hey, if I'm looking for someone with a growth mindset, what's cool questions I can ask that's not only going to make me a better conversationalist, but I'm also going to learn something really new. And I'm also going to understand if they are really in a growth mindset or not. No matter what decision I'm going to make because of that information, these are the questions I can ask to better myself in understanding others. And if I'm someone that generally looks at static variables as a way to gauge people's fundamental mindsets, then I can say, what's a better question to ask than using education, and using race, than using religion, and using political affiliation as a way to gauge other people's true mindsets, fundamental mindsets and behaviors. So I hope that was useful in some way. This, again, I'll say, is a big idea. It's not going to be done overnight. You're not going to change overnight either. But I guess I wanted to show you like a preview into how I think about questions, like how I try my best to limit my stereotyping, right? Limit my generalization, and instead look deeper into the fundamentals. Because honestly speaking, it helps me build better relationships, not only with other people, but as well. So awesome, guys. I think, I've had a wonderful time chatting with you guys. And don't hesitate to join us in the community and talk about this more. We're going to start a discussion channel. I think it's going to be super interesting. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening if you're in Eastern time zone. If you're in Asia like me, have a great rest of your weekend. We'll be in touch soon. Have a great